Record, sorry, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today? And I feel like it's deja vu here, but we'll start again.
Thank you, Senator. Andreas Machilia, Acting CEO and Director of Aviation Safety for CASA.
Paul O'Sullivan, I'm the Chair of the Board of Western Sydney Airport Company.
Simon Hickey, CEO, Western Sydney Airport.
David Jansen, the Assistant Secretary of the Western Sydney Airport Regulatory Policy Branch.
Richard Wood, First Assistant Secretary, International Aviation Technology and Services in the Department.
Marisa Purvis-Smith, Deputy Secretary, Transport Group in the Department.
Rob Sharp, Interim CEO, Air Services Australia.
Pete Curran, Deputy CEO, Air Services Australia.
Right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, but I will give the opportunity for Western Sydney Airport. Would you like to make a brief opening statement before we go to questions? Mr Hickey.
Thank you, Senator. We provided the opening statement to the committee, and so in the interest of time, I won't read it out. But I will say that Western Sydney Airport is closely involved in the community, and we understand the impact that we will have in the community, both positive in relation to the jobs and opportunities that come to the people in Western Sydney. We know that it is a growing community. In the 2030s, it'll be over 3 million people in Western Sydney alone, and it's important to consider that in perspective, understanding as well the issues around noise.
Thanks, Mr Hickey. And I'll just say, look, I appreciate the invite to come and tour the site, but unfortunately that day I'll be in West Australia. I can't, but I'd like to take the opportunity next time I'm in Sydney, pinch your people for a couple of hours, come out and have a look at it.
You're very welcome,
okay.
Senator.
Sounds exciting. The chair's back. Chair, to you.
Okay.
We've done the opening statement.
Done the opening statement. Yep. Great. Thank you, gentlemen. Look, I'll just start where I started last time in Sydney. Is there any reason you haven't provided a fulsome submission to the committee?
Senator, so thank you for that question. It's when we looked at it, and perhaps it was a mistake on my part, but we're in the middle of an EIS process. We had provided a submission to the EIS process. I understand the committee has that submission to the EIS process. But we obviously don't have flight paths that were confirmed at the time. We're not actually in operations. And so we felt that the EIS process and the submission to the EIS process was sufficient.
Did you have a discussion with the department or the Minister's office at all about whether to make a submission?
I didn't personally.
No, I'm asking, did the organisation do that?
I would have thought that someone in my office would have spoken to the department to inform them.
Did the department have a discussion with?
It didn't come through my office. I don't believe that anywhere else had a discussion.
Yeah, it's just very perplexing. Every other major airport submitted to us, but yep, sorry, yep. Sorry, Mr. I can't see your last name.
Sorry,
Mr. Wood, is it?
Wood. I was just saying, no, not in relation to this inquiry, right. Senator.
Okay. I mean, I just want to start at a high level. My takeaway from the Penrith hearing was I became very concerned that the Western Sydney Airport Corporation seems to be taking all its direction from Canberra. It seems to be the Eastern Canberra Airport, not the Western Sydney Airport. Can you assure me that you have the independence and local fight to represent Western Sydney and not just take every directional referral? Because I would have asked, went back and had a look, there would have been 4 to 5 very basic questions about local impacts where the answer from your officials were, oh, that's a matter for the department.
So, Chair, my name is Paul O'Sullivan. I'm the Chair of the Board at the airport. I might begin answering in that question. This is a GBE. It has an independent board.
Of course.
Obviously, we answer to our shareholders, the Department of Finance and the Department of Infrastructure. But the board is very much focused on making sure that we meet all the requirements of the airport plan, and that in particular means maximising the benefits of the airport to the local community and to the taxpayer. So we're very exercised on that. We do want to be cooperative. We look to work well with our shareholders, but we are very focused on that. I'll just add one other thing. Which, I think we're here to learn and listen today in terms of community feedback. But it is important to say that the board's direction has always been that this is a challenger airport. So people in Sydney have a choice, unlike many other large catchments. And so we will need to be an airport that is seen by the community as a force for good, as a positive. So we do spend a lot of time saying, let's make sure that we are listening to the community, because what will be really damaging to us is if we open and there's any community resistance in any significant sense to our presence. So we do work quite hard on community engagement. Clearly, based on the feedback, there's more we can do.
Sure. Well, I suppose my particular issue, look, I completely agree. You've got a shareholder, you've got to cooperate with them, as you said. It's just that, you know, in any other business that has shareholders, the shareholders would expect day-to-day decisions to be made by the company itself. And so, for example, the day-to-day decision that I asked about was what noise mitigation efforts are you putting in place to help the residents of Luddenham, who we'd heard from. Some of these residents are only a kilometre from the tarmac. It's not a flight path issue. It's a basic, just being a neighbour issue, and you're a pretty noisy neighbour, of course. Can you give me more insights into what you are actually doing? And I don't want to hear meetings because I'm sick and tired of tick-a-box sort of meetings here. What are you doing to help mitigate the impact of people that are just a kilometre from you?
You're absolutely right. There's a lot we can do, and I'll let the CEO talk about the various measures we have in place. There are a lot to do with the way we operate day-to-day in the airport.
Right. Yep.
So obviously, again, we're not actually an operational airport, and we will be putting these things in place to mitigate noise on the ground as we move forward, and things that we've done in the design that will also reduce it. So in terms of airfield design, we've got what we call fast taxiways. Those fast taxiways are designed so you've got 5-minute taxiing time, so that reduces significantly the noise that's on the ground. Just because of the design of those taxiways. We also have on both sides of the airfield, we have an environmental zone, and that gives a buffer to any residential on one side, and we have topography where there's a hill on the other side that goes up to Luddenham. So that topography actually assists.
Is that natural, or are you...
No, the environmental zone, we have dedicated an environmental zone along the river on one side, and so that has been dedicated for the life of the airport. The topography on the other side, we left that hill there as we actually moved all of the other hills around the airport to flatten the airport.
Right.
In terms of airfield, that's on that side. In terms of airfield procedures, we'll work with air services to introduce airport collaborative decision making, which ensures so what that will do is we'll hold aircraft at the gate if there's any delays on the runway, and that's best practice in terms of reducing noise, so that you haven't got aircraft that are actually on their engines as they go to take off, and reduces traffic congestion. We'll also work with the airlines to introduce single engine taxing through our commercial negotiations. Now, what that will do again is reduce the noise as they move around the airfield. Typically, you can move to single engine taxiing, except where there's a ramp, but we're quite flat at the airport, so I think that will be something that we can negotiate with the airlines as we go forward. In terms of apron procedures, so each of the aprons will have limited operations such as ground engine running, APU operations and other similar activities that create noise, which we will limit in sensitive areas and at different times. So night, for example, operators will be required to use our ground power units, and that will be so that they actually switch off their engines and use those ground power units as soon as they get onto the stands. Now, we also
They're quieter, are they? The ground?
Yes,
the ground power units, are they?
They're all electrical.
They're electrical.
You would not hear anything
Right,
once you're on the ground power units, and so we will enforce that standard for aircraft that are on the hard stands. We've actually put in additional hard stands so that we can, and we've put in a lot.
Is that different from other airports? Or?
We've got a lot of GPU in our airport, ground power units in our airport.
Because I'd noticed when I bought other airports, they usually have a diesel genset sort of powering them at the start, so you won't have that.
We will have
electric,
and so what it is in older airports, it's more difficult to enforce on occasion. So we've got sufficient GPUs that actually will be able to use it more effectively. Some pilots don't like using it, so actually you've always got this.
What's the difference? Presumably it's just electricity.
There's a lot of things that we could talk about pilots.
Okay, they just like the smell of carbon emissions in the morning.
That's right, they do like that. Engine runs, if required, will be restricted to daylight hours where possible, so that you don't get those noises. On the land side, we've also looked at it from a land side, so vehicle dwelling and engine running will be restricted in noise-sensitive areas, such as beside in the bus stop that might be adjacent to a hotel into the future. The bus set-down area is being located near our business park, so it's away from residences. So again, you reduce the noise on the ground. We've got the M12 connection will also minimise noise because it will be on the motorway as opposed to in residential streets, predominantly as the M12 is our main entrance to the airport. We also are an airport that has a metro from day one, so in fact that I think is unique of any airport in the world, in Australia, to have a metro from day one, and so that also will reduce noise in particular.
All right, that's a much better answer than we got in Penrith. I'm glad you've come along. Thank you for that. Now, yeah, go for it.
Are there any physical mitigation measures? I mean, if you're talking about the Ludlam, which is, you're saying up on the bank.
There is an embankment there that will reduce the noise. The other thing that we have done, so the Ludlam Progress Association was very keen to develop, I think it was 400% increase in residential housing right next to the airport in that area. The airport did, in fact, put in a recommendation to New South Wales Land Planning that should not be considered, and that it was more appropriate to move that residential housing closer to the new metro stop in Ludlam, which I think would mean that they're not affected. The future residents are also not affected by noise through to overdevelopment very close to the airport.
Just moving on then, this might be a question for the broader set of witnesses here. We also received evidence that there is not a lot of research on the impacts of aircraft noise on native Australian species, and obviously it would appear that there is going to be a significant number of planes flying over a World Heritage Area, I believe, Blue Mountains World Heritage Area. What work is being done at all to look at and assess impacts on Australian native species of low-flying large aircraft?
Senator, I might start and then Mr Jansen might have a little bit more detail, but it's certainly a requirement in the conditions that were set on the scope of the environmental impact assessment that biodiversity and wilderness issues were considered in the environmental impact assessment, and we undertook work in that regard. It was considered acceptable by the Department of Environment prior to the release of the environmental impact assessment. Obviously, we've now had submissions in relation to the environmental impact statement, which we have considered and are required to respond to. That's still being finalised. We anticipate it will be released later this year, and I'll have a little bit more information in relation to that. There are a number of areas where there were some studies done, but a lot of the evidence is sort of established and has been drawn upon and is outlined in the
Is there evidence from Australia? Because it seemed to be the evidence we received that most of the evidence on this is from overseas.
Well, I think,
is there much evidence of this in Australia? If so, what airport?
I'll check if Mr Jansen has got more detail, but one of the first steps that's undertaken in the environmental assessment is to actually review the existing databases which outline both the nature of threatened species. And there were a couple of instances where we were asked by Department of Environment to do a little bit more work. But Mr Jansen might have some more.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Senator. David Jansen, Western Sydney Airport, Regulatory Policy Branch. The EIS for Western Sydney started with a position of looking at the federal government's protected matter search tools that identified 92 potential species that could be impacted through the flight paths of Western Sydney. We also looked at the BioNet database, which is a state database as well. Generally, the impact on wildlife was looked at through two different lenses. The first lens was the possibility of what we call wildlife strikes. So that typically is where an aircraft will hit typically a flying fox or an ibis in the case of the area around Western Sydney. And generally, those impacts only occur within a 13-kilometre buffer around most airports. So that was assessed. I think, Senator, the context of which this question was raised was more to do with the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area. As I said, we have identified those 92 species that are known to occur there. I would say, though, by the time our aircraft get around to near that area, they're above the typical heights that you associate with wildlife strike and outside that wildlife buffer, which then leaves that second lens, which is the noise impacts on some songbird species in particular, as well as light impacts as well. What the EIS found, though, was there would be negligible impact from noise and light spill on those species, given the height our aircraft do cross the World Heritage Area. There was a caveat, though, and they did point out that, I think perhaps to your point, that there isn't a lot of international or indeed domestic research on the specific effects of aircraft noise on some bird species. So that is a known gap in the space.
With that in mind, it would seem sensible that maybe a condition on the EIS approval, if it comes, is that research is done on that when the airport gets going. Is that something you're going to propose?
That would be a matter for government, but...
Well, you can propose conditions too. You're the one seeking approval, but you're not considering that at the moment, or...?
I can't really go into what's being considered, so I presuppose the Minister's decision. But those sorts of conditions
well, my question was specific.
The
Western Sydney Airport hasn't made a decision that say, look, we need to put aside some funds here to monitor the impact of our airport when it gets up and running.
Well, the EIS does have a range of mitigations in it. They do tend to be focused, though, on that wildlife strike element rather than the noise and light spill element over the World Heritage Area. What further conditions may be imposed on top of those that we've already identified, as I said, is a matter for government? Now,
just maybe my last set of questions before I hand over. They had a lot of discussion in Penrith about the planning for Sydney's flight design as a whole, and the feedback we seem to receive is that things are being looked in isolation, that there's plans for Western Sydney, but there's pre-existing, obviously, flight paths for KSA. What is the status of it? A lot of people seem to be suggesting to us that there should be a whole of Sydney design of the flight path, and that could help ameliorate noise impacts or share noise impacts across the whole basin.
So, Senator, the flight paths that the department's led the development of have been developed in terms of the airport plan that was approved by the then government in 2016, and that actually required that we seek to minimise any impact on the existing noise sharing arrangements for Sydney. So we've not taken a look at the whole basin because we were specifically asked not to do so. Yep. We have made some minor tweaks to a small number of flight paths from Kingsford Smith because we've needed to for safety reasons, but it's beyond the scope of our work to do so.
It's a policy decision, basically.
It'd be a policy
matter
decision
for government
to do
decide
that.
whether
That's
to
correct,
do
Senator.
that. Okay. Does Sydney Airport Corporation have a very strong view on this? Do you, as a corporation, have a view on what would be best for people of Sydney?
Noise sharing across the entire Sydney Basin is something that ultimately will be looked at as we have capacity growth in Western Sydney. I think at the moment the arrangements that we've got in place are suitable for our initial growth as an airport. I think as we come to a second runway, that will be something that I think will become a matter that will be looked at by government. That's the airport's view, the Western Sydney Airport's view.
Is there just a bit of a segue? Are you in the flight path design for Western Sydney? Are you applying these sort of noise sharing principles, which seem to be becoming more attractive? Certainly, looking at in Brisbane, the TRACS report. Are you applying that principle, or are you just deciding on particular parts?
That might be one better for the department, Senator,
Sure,
as we're leading the work on that. And just to clarify the governance arrangements, the department was asked to lead the development of the flight paths and then subsequently the EIS, largely because at the time there was no airport company, so we effectively stepped into the role of an airport in developing those flight paths, which we've done. And once the EIS is complete, it'll pass over to Air Services for the detailed design. That said, through that journey, ourselves, Air Services, CASA and Western Sydney Airport have all been very joined up. We're all members of a expert steering committee and a range of other technical bodies which the department chairs and leads. In terms of your question about noise sharing, etc., I think it's a slightly different approach. We've had the advantage in Western Sydney that it is a greenfields airport. There are some things you've heard in evidence previously about continuous descents, and that's one of the design philosophies that we've been able to introduce from the start. So those continuous descents are something that we think will be able to be implemented effectively from day one, and it is very much an approach that we are trying to share noise. One of the requirements on the flight path design is we have what's called reciprocal runway operations, which is something we can do at night when Kingsford Smith is closed, where you have aircraft taking off and departing at the southwest end of the airport. So this means that you'll have most aircraft in much less densely populated areas. Of course, there is some impact in some of the communities around there, but instead of going over highly populated areas such as St Clair, Penrith, etc., it'll be more to the southwest in less populated areas. So that's one of the design considerations, noting that over time capacity constraints will restrict that. So noise has very much been at the centre of the flight path design.
Okay, thank you. Now, look, I forgot one thing, sorry, just came to my mind. Did ask how many people are qualifying for insulation or compensation for noise around the Western Sydney Airport. That wasn't answered either.
Thank you, Senators. So in the draft EIS, which was released in October last year, the government included its draft policy for the noise insulation and property acquisition scheme. That draft policy, I think, identified around 90 plus properties that were potentially eligible for noise insulation should that draft policy be finalised by government on its current terms. We received a lot of submissions on the draft policy, and those submissions are being taken into account in the process of finalising the EIS. And when that the final EIS is released, which we expect to be a bit later this year, we'll have better data to be able to share on just how many people may be entitled to it.
Is it going to be more than 90?
I would imagine so, yes.
Okay, but you can't give me a figure right now.
No.
Okay.
Senator, if I could add one point that might be helpful for the committee. One thing that's very different with Western Sydney Airport and Sydney and Adelaide, which are the two existing airports with noise insulation schemes, is there you've got, in those two airports, you've got houses within a few hundred metres of the airport or a runway. In Western Sydney, the land use protections that have been put in place for many decades have meant that there's, within a 5 or 6 kilometre radius of the airport, there is relatively little urban development, which has been why the airport has been able to proceed in the way it is.
I suppose the other issue, though, is some of those areas have very low ambient noise too, though, so that they might have a slightly different impact compared to someone who already lives in a noisy environment.
Yes, absolutely, Senator. It's something we're very conscious of. That there are different noise impacts. Noise is a very subjective experience anyway, but particularly if you're in a quieter, more rural location.
All right, Senator Hodgins-May, do you have questions? Not on this topic. Senator Colbeck? Or Senator?
No.
You didn't have any, I think, do you? Senator Colbeck, do you have any on Western Sydney? Okay, I will just quickly check. I think I did remember one thing there. Just the nighttime flights as well. How many nighttime flights do you predict will occur when the airport opens?
I think, Senator, on airport opening, from the perspective, and Mr Hickey might have a view from the airport's perspective, in the way in which we've modelled it for the purposes of the environmental impact assessment, we've actually used 2033 as the first date for modelling, because we felt that was the first time when we would have a reasonable guess, a reasonable forecast. Mr Jansen, do you have numbers on 2033? I'm not sure if I've got them to hand, but we can check for you, Senator.
We do have numbers, not to hand, Senator, but we can take this on notice per runway mode. But one thing to bear in mind is that The early part of the night is covered under one set of flight paths, so what we call the day-evening sets of flight paths, and then from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. is covered under another set of flight paths. So we'd have to take data from both and put them together to give an answer for you, but we can certainly take that on notice.
Do you have the answer from 11 to, would you say 6 or 5?
If we could take that on notice, Senator. The information's certainly there, and it's public through the noise information tool that has been made available.
If you could also break those down into to freight or passenger or medical, if you've got them.
We'll best endeavour, Senator. I'm not sure if we'll have a forecast specifically on freight, but we'll do our best endeavours.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right. That might be it then, I think, for Western Sydney. If there is nothing else, thank you very much. We'll let you guys go. Now, I think we're going to move on to Melbourne, I believe. Did we have a specific, or just other? Just other. Well, I'll let Senator Hodgins-May go on, have a go at Melbourne first, and then we can, then any other questions.
Great.
Do people need a break, or we're happy to keep going?
Keep going.
Cool. Okay, all right. Thank you for coming back. Senator Hodgins-May.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, everything right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's true.
Just wanted to speak about the condition. So, yeah, last week it was announced Minister King had approved the third runway. In relation to the noise considerations, I understand that the noise amelioration program will be finalised for dwellings and facilities in the Standard Australian Noise Exposure Forecast 25 contour or higher. Is that correct?
That's correct,
yeah?
Senator.
Thank you. Just for clarity, does this mean programs will be developed for properties in the ANF 25 and higher, or will the program potentially be developed for properties in an ANF higher than 25 and not including ANF 25? So, is it just higher then, or does it include?
I'll just go back one step.
Please.
So the Minister approved the Melbourne third runway with conditions on the 10th of September. Yeah. In those conditions, there were 3 specific conditions to address noise issues. The first of those is a legally enforceable commitment to reinstate the existing east-west runway, which is 0927, to its original length. I know that was covered this morning. There is also a condition on a noise sharing and airspace concept plan, which will require consultation with Essendon Fields airports over the 5 runway operations. And the third, specific to noise, is the noise amelioration plan to address aircraft noise on residential dwellings and other facilities within the standard ANEF 25 contour.
Within the standard. So that includes 25?
That's right.
Yep, thank you.
Yes, that's right.
Great, just wanting some clarity for stakeholders. Planning for Western Sydney Airport includes a noise insulation compensation scheme for properties within ANEF 20 and ANEF 25. Given this, I'm just curious to know why the government's only requiring Melbourne Airport to provide an amelioration program for properties in Contour 25.
So the APAM, the Australia Pacific Airports Melbourne, provided in its master plan from 2022 the ANEF 25 contour, and to remain consistent with that, that was the condition that was imposed on the major development plan.
So, yeah, it just seems curious that Melbourne Airport's, like, how's the third runway different to the airport in Western Sydney? Would this then indicate that homes in the ANEF 20 won't be compensated in Melbourne?
I'll take that on notice, please, Senator, if that's all right. It's a quite complex matter.
Especially on Friday afternoon.
That's right.
Yes, no, that's okay, thank you. How will the government enforce the implementation of the strategy?
So the conditions, and I'm happy to table a copy of the conditions. They are publicly available on our website. The conditions as they are attached to an approval with conditions by the Minister. That is enforceable under the Act, and we have ensured that APAM has had an opportunity to review those conditions and comment on them in advance of the Minister's consideration, and APAM has agreed that it will, of course, deliver those, but they are legally enforceable.
Thank you. And are you able to tell me, so I haven't maybe the details in there, but will the government ensure that the strategy is developed with impacted community members and councils? Yeah. If you give me one moment, Senator, I can go to the page that's within the noise. Sorry, within the M3R conditions itself. So, are you specifically referring to one of the particular conditions? Was it the noise sharing and airspace concept plan that you were referring to? Yes. Under section 3.1, just bear with me, 3.1 I 1 to 5, it outlines the consultation that APAM will take in preparing the noise sharing and airspace concept plan with each of the following, which is the airlines that operate flights to, from and airport operator groups based at Melbourne Airport and Essendon Fields Airport. You will also include other Melbourne Basin aerodromes, including Avalon Airport, Moorabbin Airport and RAF Base Point Cook, the Victorian Department of Transport and Planning, local governments in the area surrounding Melbourne Airport and local communities in the area surrounding Melbourne Airport. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I haven't got those conditions, so that's fine. That's helpful to know. I do note that another condition, though, was that there be a community health study into the impact of the third runway, collecting data before its operational and for its first 20 years. Yes. Is there information in that document about what the community health study will involve? The terms of reference for the community health study are yet to be drafted, Senator. Okay. So they will be drafted within 12 months of the approval of the MDP. It would be our expectation that that APAM must consult with the CAG, the Melbourne Airport CAG, and set out a methodology for how it will monitor each of the community health impacts, how it will collect baseline data, and, as you've rightly said, to collect that data over a 20-year period, and that once we have a draft terms of reference, I'm confident that they will include a consultation plan as well. Thank you. And do you have an idea yet of how the government would intend to use the findings of that report? Or? That will form part of the terms of reference, Senator. Thank you. Just in relation to the health risk assessment prior to approval, believe that you told previous Senator Janet Rice that the department didn't intend to commission an independent health impact study into Melbourne Airport's third runway. I just wanted to check, is that still correct? Or, no independent study was done before it was approved? That's correct. And so were you relying on the airport's study that they referred to earlier when you considered? The process, Senator, for considering MDPs is that the airport lessee company brings forward the information for the government's consideration, and it isn't the usual practice that we would then commission any additional report over and above what's being provided. I think I highlighted before that it remains open to a minister in considering an MDP whether to seek further information from the airport lessee company, to refuse the MDP or to approve it with conditions, which is what the minister has done on this occasion with Melbourne. So just to clarify, it was just Melbourne Airport's commissioned report that was considered in relation to health impacts? That's right. No external other ones. Are you able to provide any information about what advice the department provided to the minister in relation to health impacts? I don't have that information with me, Senator. I'm happy to take a question on notice. That would be great. Thank you. In 2022, Bringbank City Council commissioned their own health risk assessment, and I'm just... Should I assume then that no, that wasn't considered by the department or minister?
What I can say, Senator, is that I know that Brimbank has provided information to, as one of the interested parties, has provided information to Melbourne Airport for them to consider in providing the MDP for the Minister. I can't say the extent to which that information was individually included in the report that was provided to us.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose it's just so yeah, it's very likely that that other health report wasn't considered unless the airport included it themselves. It wasn't considered by the department though directly. No,
I couldn't say that it was considered directly by the department unless it formed part of the MDP that came forward for the Minister's consideration.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions?
No.
That's
Friday Arbo, I reckon. I'm done.
All right. I've got some generic questions, but Senator Colbeck, you go first.
Can I just to clarify the answer you gave to Senator Hodgins-May in relation to the compensation package, and I just want to make sure I've got it clear in my head. So the reason that you've used the EP 25 was because that's what Melbourne had in their management plan.
So to clarify, Senator, the Melbourne APAM, Australia Pacific Airport Melbourne, when it presented its master plan and it was approved in 2022, it specified the ANEF 25 contour, and that is the technically endorsed contour with Air Services Australia. And so to be consistent with that, when the major development plan came forward for Melbourne's third runway, it referenced ANEF 25.
Yet the sensitivity at the moment is measured down to 20, and in Sydney the compensation goes down to 20. That's correct? So it's because of the reason they specified ANEF 25 was because that was the requirement set within the
master plan, Senator.
No, not well. Why would they? I just want to clarify why they chose 25. Because of some regulatory framework that said 25. Bearing in mind Sydney compensate down to 20. So I'm just trying to understand why the difference. That's all.
I can't do a direct comparison, Senator. They are different airports established at different times under different conditions. I take it when you're talking about Sydney, are you talking about Western Sydney International Airport, or are you talking about Kingsford Smith?
Well, my understanding was Senator Hodgins-May's questions were relating to Sydney Kingsford Smith Airport.
my questions then were Melbourne.
Yes, I know, but you're making a comparison between the compensations provided for Sydney, which I took as Kingsford Smith, which was down to ANEF 20.
20.
And I'm just trying to understand. Well,
Western Sydney. Sorry, it was Western Sydney comparison.
It's Western Sydney.
Yeah.
Western Sydney.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so that's clarified one thing for me. But again,
Well, they're not different times.
that changes the whole equation again even further. I'm just trying to understand why the two different levels, given the sensitivity of ANEF goes down to 20. We've had a conversation before about measuring to a greater sensitivity. That's a different matter. But why the difference? Why would Melbourne choose 25? Western Sydney has to do 20. What? I mean,
I don't have that information available to me, Senator. I'll just check whether my colleague does. We'll take it on notice, though.
Okay.
Come back with a
and
response.
I suppose my next question was, were there any residences within the gradients of 20 to 25? There's another question I don't know.
Thanks. We'll take it on notice, Senator.
And I'm just trying to rationalise why the difference. That's all I'm trying to work on. I just want to go to Hobart and some of the things that came out of the hearings in Hobart a few weeks ago, and it goes to, well, I suppose the Hobson's choice that's come out of that process since the initial flight path designs that were 2017, 2018, the consultations with the subsequent consultations with the community that resulted in the whole system being moved to the west by 5 or 10 k's or whatever the difference was, which provided relief for the community of Dunalley, which was the majorly impacted community to start with, but then put the flight path over the communities of Primrose Sands and Carlton River. And so now, of course, Carlton River and Primrose Sands are saying, can we move 5 or so kilometres back to the east? And it was interesting to watch the faces of everybody in the room when we had them all there together, because Dunalley realised that it was coming back towards them, and although everyone's very polite to each other, they're trying to work out, okay, how does this work? I asked some further questions to the operators of Cambridge, obviously with aviation experience, but one of the witnesses there had experience in flight path design. And so you've got a convergence point at Copping, or over Copping, and so the residents there cop everything. And then you've got 2 tracks that come from that. And in the documentation that I've got, it talks about reducing the number of flights on a single track, and you've got copies of the document that comes out of our papers in front of you. So you've got the RNPAR, Smart Track and RNAV approaches. From the evidence that we got, once you get past the convergence point, there's only one aircraft going to be in that range between the convergence point and the airport at any one time. My question was, moving the system one way or the other causes grief to one community or the other. Is there a reason, apart from what's listed in the on the document, reducing the flights over a single track, that there has to be 2 tracks? I mean, so I suppose fundamentally, is there a lower impact path that can be picked by moving the convergence point from Copping and taking the heat off that community to an area that's not so densely populated, and an area between Dunalley and Carlton River that's got really low population levels that can take the majority of the traffic and therefore mitigate the impact on the 2 communities on either sides of the situation? I mean, is there a technical reason why there has to be 2 tracks apart from spreading the load, if you like?
Senator, before I hand over to Mr Curran, it is an interesting conundrum in terms of where do you get the balance right.
Very cognisant of it.
And that is playing out in Hobart. Just for context, the Primrose Sands and Carlton River arrivals were higher than what we were originally envisaging, and the post-implementation review indicated that there were some impacts from the RMP technology that we were using. So that actually drove more traffic over those areas than what we were originally thinking. But I'll pass to Mr Curran just to comment specifically around the 2 routes.
Question.
Senator, thank you. I'm familiar with the evidence. I think it was Parvion from Cambridge that discussed this. I think given some of the complexity that we've had with this particular issue, I'd like to provide a more detailed answer on notice so we can be very clear about the rationale. I think your premise that the 2 flight path purpose is to share the noise is broadly correct. The convergence point around Copping is typical to how we do flight path design from a safety perspective. There is a route from the en route structure into the arrivals, and then at a certain point you go into the instrument flight procedure design. So there's the convergence point is probably is normal practice. Could that convergence point be located somewhere else? Potentially, yes, Senator. There are always cascading implications for how the rest of the en route structure would work that would need to be considered. So this has been a complex matter, as you know, since 2017, 2019. The trial that we're running at present to try to share that noise load between the two communities, given the very evenly split perspectives from the communities around where noise best be placed, has proven to be a complex challenge for us. I'd like to give a precise answer to you on notice, if I may, though.
No, look, I'm happy with that, but it is clearly a curly one. You move because you move one way, you move the other. I mean, going back to the conversation we had before about the various priorities, and you make the airlines fly a bit further. They're not happy because they're burning. It's costing them more. But the amenity of the people under the flight path.
That's certainly the balance that we've tried to.
It probably goes to those
with.
other questions I asked before as well.
Yes, it does.
All right. So, I mean, I'll look forward to a detailed answer to that and consideration of the conversation that we've just had about it. Well, I mean, is there a requirement for such a broad separation of the two paths?
Senator, I think your observation earlier, as made by the gent from Paravion, is that they very rarely experience two aircraft simultaneously on those routes. So that's probably right, but I'd like to make sure that we've got some data that actually supports how that structure is used. Part of the challenge for Hobart has been, as it's gotten busier, we've had to, just going back to 17 and 19, we've had to look at that airspace, put in a more structured operation to handle the volumes of traffic that are in there.
No, I get that, and I have absolutely no argument with that. I get that completely. But the reality is that, like so many of these other airports, it's not only become busier, they're spending $60 million to upgrade the runway for international flights, so that means it's going to get even busier, and you're going to have larger, heavier aircraft with bigger loads and all of those sorts of things that are going to be coming in, and the considerations that are the reason we're all sitting here are obviously part of the discussion.
Senator, I think in the response that we'll provide you, we'll confirm some of the technical detail around why those flight paths are shaped the way they are. There's turn gradient considerations for what different types of aircraft are able to operate. And so there's a range of technical factors that I A, can't go into, but B, I won't try to go into today. But we'll provide that in the response.
Yeah. Well, bearing in mind that the majority of the load seems to be going over the tightest turn gradient, more than anticipated. Anyway, I'll say no more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Just got a couple more questions. I just wanted to understand what's being done on this ANEF measure. We heard earlier today that it's actually based on survey dose response sort of results from 40 years ago. It seems a little out of date. Are there any plans to update that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So as we mentioned, we've asked Standards Australia to update the Australian standard, which contains the ANEF details in it. It will be a question for Standards Australia whether they decide to redo the survey or whether they undertake another means of updating it.
Is there any particular reason why, like, the government couldn't fund a survey or do it?
there's no reason why the government couldn't fund it,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
But it is a question for
Has that been
Standards
costed at
Australia.
all? Has anyone provided costings on a survey? Or?
We haven't. We made the application to Standards Australia in August when the white paper, once the white paper was decided, and that was what the government had decided it wanted to do. We haven't received any advice from Standards Australia yet as to what they will require from us in order to undertake that review.
Right, okay, okay. Also, just on the white paper, I see in there it's a very firm statement saying no more restrictions or caps or curfews will be placed. Was there any modelling done for the white paper about measuring the costs and benefits of restrictions on airports, particularly at night?
No, there wasn't, Senator.
Okay. Just trying to understand, we see a lot of modelling provided by largely the airports saying that caps, curfews, etc. would cost X amount of money. I don't, and I asked earlier some, but there doesn't seem to be any research done then on, well, what are the costs of having noise at night, people not being able to sleep, etc. Are you aware of anything that seeks to put a value on that cost?
I'm not, Senator. The only study that I'm aware of on the impacts of environmental noise caused by aircraft was conducted in 2018 by an N-Health steering committee, and it didn't seek to quantify
a total, like an economic cost or something.
There was not
like
an
that.
economic cost attached to that.
Okay. It just, yeah. I mean, I suppose where I'm heading here is put my my 2 cents on the table. I don't really like the word curfew because even in regards to Sydney, it's not a curfew. There's some flights that are allowed to come in and that. But it seems strange that we don't maybe take a less binary approach and look at reasonable restrictions at night. Many other major pieces of infrastructure in our cities are restricted at certain hours of the day. Truck movements are restricted. Ports are often restricted. Has there been any particular work done on, well, what would be the right balance of allowing people to sleep at night, but still allowing some flights, some essential flights to come in and out?
For airports that are not already subject to a curfew,
Any airport?
Senator?
Yep.
Well,
Western
no,
Sydney, any old
because
ones?
the government's policy position is that it doesn't intend to impose curfews, so no, we haven't conducted such studies.
Senator,
Yeah, well, what evidence is that policy based on then?
So whether other airports have done any analysis in relation to that, they might have, but we haven't done any tried to put an actual economic figure on it. The government's policy has, as they have stated in the aviation white paper.
Is there, what is the evidence for? I'm just trying to understand. Is it just an assertion that that's our policy? And I'm not trying to be partisan here because it's been the policy of repetitive governments of both sides. But is it based on any real world evidence that this is of a net benefit to the Australian community to have unrestricted access to airports at any time of the day?
As I think we have just stated, we haven't put a number or an economic benefit number on that. It is a judgment. There will be trade-offs with any curfew or not curfew, allowing 24 hours, health, residents, economic of an airport and the connectivity that any particular airport provides. So it is a world of trade-offs. The government has made a statement and has decided its policy as per stated in the aviation white paper.
Was there any, in consideration of the white paper, was there any assessment done on thresholds of noise that should only be allowed? I think we've received some evidence that in some European cities this is coming into effect now. Was any assessment done on those rather than a generic sort of looking at noise, actually having some hard, well, this is how much noise can be allowed over a certain time or at a certain time of day?
Senator, as I mentioned before, the Green Paper White process was conducted over 18 months or longer, and during that process we certainly received submissions on a whole range of different ways of regulating noise, and certainly the White Paper Task Force examined the regimes that were in place in other countries in the world as part of the White Paper development process, yes.
What did those evaluations conclude?
That we would stick with the ANEF.
That was the advice of the department to the government?
I don't know that we have the exact advice. I think we've, as you've mentioned, the experts have said ANEF is still the right way to measure it.
This is not a measurement point, though. My point is not necessarily. I mean, let's take as a given that ANEF is a good way of measuring it. My point is that then assessing the values, which, with all respect to experts, they're not really. There's no expert that can make this judgment. It's a judgment about whether or not we should have unrestricted access to airport use, or should there be some restrictions, given the cost on people's lifestyles of unrestricted access. It's a judgment call, ultimately. Although you can inform that judgment call with sort of some hedonistic type economic modelling that doesn't seem to have been done, but yeah.
So as we've mentioned, we haven't put a monetary or an economic value or a cost-benefit value on economic versus noise issues, and the government has made a decision in relation to its policy in relation to curfews.
Yeah, it just seems strange to do cost-benefit studies on everything else, but not on aircraft noise. Okay, so no cost-benefit studies. Look, finally from me, it's been a running topic, staffing levels at air traffic controllers. Can we have an update on that situation? Is it still constraining airport operations?
Yes, well, pleasingly, we have seen some progress with 56 additional staff coming in recently and another 30-odd coming through. What I will say is, as I've come into their services, progress has been made, but they still aren't at the optimal level where you need headcount to reach 100% of the service standards. So in other words, no variations to airspace management. End of December is when we arrive at that position.
You think you'll have enough, you'll
Correct.
be right to go.
Yeah.
So are those staffing shortages to date, have they been, and are they still limiting the ability to reduce noise?
There's no implication for noise management. So, for example, sod props in Brisbane, it's actually typically in lower capacity modes, so you actually don't need the staff there. Some of the advantages for the increase in sod props in Brisbane will necessitate some additional staff, but we're well placed to have that in the requirements for Brisbane in November when we move to that new mode. What I would say is that flexibility of the workforce is actually part of this. So we're not just looking at headcount numbers, we're also looking at, can we move people around? Can we actually have some pools of staff available, so if someone rings in sick in the morning, we can quickly get resourcing in. So the flexibility element is something that we're working on in tandem. It's not just about headcount. But we do still have some local areas that have been impacted. Albury, for example, whilst it's only a very small number of people we're short, it is impacting on our ability to have the airspace open for the full period. Having said that, our latest industry report for August did highlight that we're less than 1% of the impact on the industry, which is great. We're not resilient at the moment because we haven't quite got to that final headcount number.
I have spoken to some others that suggest that a lack of air traffic controllers does constrain the choice of some different flight paths and what have you, some of which could reduce or at least share noise potentially. Maybe it's a better way of putting it. Is that potentially an impact?
Yeah, Senator, I'll ask Mr Chakra to come forward. He actually runs that ATC area and can comment specifically on that comment.
Hi, Senators. Craig Jarker. I'm the Acting Airspace and Network Officer. Senator, in relation to any particular airports or in a broad sense, is that question?
Sorry?
Sorry. In relation to any particular airports, is that question
Well,
around
yeah,
staffing?
Brisbane, that was mentioned to me in regards to both Brisbane and Sydney, but yes, I suppose I'm asking in a generic sense, though.
Yeah.
Yep.
As Mr Sharp said, broadly, for us to move to a lower capacity mode like sod props doesn't require additional people to do that.
This wasn't about sod drops.
Wasn't
It was
about
mentioned
sod
to me. It was about potentially choosing different flight paths, and as I said, it might be better to characterise it as implementing noise sharing arrangements more than necessarily reducing noise overall. So changing where they turn and things like this, is that was sort of what was mentioned to me, but is that not a risk? The staff sort of just don't impact that?
Mentioned to you, obviously, there, Senator. The role of the air traffic controller is generally, obviously, plugging in, talking to aircraft. We do, as we do procedure development, seek feedback from them at times. But perhaps that might have been something in relation to that. But as far as on a day-to-day basis, does our number of air traffic controllers impact the noise outcomes? No.
Okay. All right. That's it from me, Senator Colbeck. That's all. Okay. Done it before 5 o'clock. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for your time today. I think some questions were taken on notice. We're asking for those back by the 27th of September. And look, apart from that, just need to thank everybody for coming today. Thank everybody for appearing. Thank you to Hansard. Thank you to the Secretariat and to all the senators who came along. Thank you and enjoy your weekend. I adjourn the committee.